Uh, yes, there is an announcement that the recording is in process. Thank you, Carmen. Hi, and 안녕하세요. That's hello in Korean. Happy harvest moon to all my people of the lunar cycle, and happy autumn equinox. I am so excited to be here, standing in front of my laptop in front of you all with my friends here. I realized when we were planning this that the day falls on harvest moon. So I'm kind of bummed to be missing out on some fall harvest festivities, which basically just means stuffing my face with a bunch of yummy food. But I'll get there eventually. It's not quite dinner time on the Pacific Coast yet, but I'm so excited to be in conversation with my friends, Roxy, Devin, and Carmen tonight. And you are all here because you want to get out there with your bike and your bike pals and enjoy all there is to enjoy about overnight bike touring. You've come to the right place, and we have the right people to give you the download of all the information. And there is a ton of it that we have in store today, but we'll keep this as smooth and conversational as possible because bike travel is really about the people and the relationships formed as much as it is about the trips themselves. And I'll just quickly introduce myself since I'm the only voice here at the moment. My name is Jess, and I use she and they pronouns, and I'll say a little bit more about myself later. I do want to give a quick shout out to Eva, who is the Bike Overnights project manager and the Adventure Cycling Association, for inviting me to work on this webinar and for the opportunity to contribute to the ambassador guide, the ride leader guide, which is also why we're here today. It honestly has been really rewarding for me to give back to the bike community in this way. So much of what I learned is self-taught, and I didn't have other people to show me the ropes of bike camping. I learned a lot from my friends over the years, so I am really fortunate and honored to be giving back and paying it forward in this way. I also want to express gratitude for my friends, Devin and Roxy. Roxy and I co-organize bike events in Seattle, and Devin is just always getting people together and growing a compassionate net that works. And Carmen, who I recently met and have had the pleasure of working with to organize this webinar. And the last note of thank you to Christina at the Ciclista Zine for sharing her wisdom and work that really helped shape the sections around Indigenous relations in the guide. So thank you. So although we are meeting digitally today, we are going to make acknowledgement as we're convening from many different places around the world. So I will start with the digital land acknowledgement that we really must consider the legacy of colonization embedded within technological structures, including the infrastructure of high-speed internet, which is not available in many Indigenous communities, and although they cut through native territories. And even the technologies are central to our ability to come together virtually. They have a significant impact on our environment, which has a negative impact to our changing climates that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. And I'll hand it to Carmen for the land acknowledgement.
Yeah, on behalf of the Adventure Cycling Association, we recognize that we have a really complicated legacy with bike travel. We are headquartered on the ancestral land of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Nation. This is land that we have recreated for over 40 years as bike travelers, and we are incredibly privileged to do so. We honor the present and ancestral stewards of these lands and acknowledge the privilege of living as well as traveling by bike in these beautiful places. We recognize the responsibility we have to organize, work, and care for these grounds to practice good land stewardship, to educate ourselves on Native histories and present, and to support Indigenous-led activism. We raise our hands to the ancestors and hold ourselves accountable to these practices and to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes.
Thanks, Carmen, for leading us through that. So here's our itinerary for this evening. It's still sunny here, so it feels funny to say evening, but I know it's lots of different time zones we got. First, we'll cover, first we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll cover the fundamental questions around why do this thing called bike camping or bike touring? Why do it? With who will we go bike camping with or bike traveling with? Where will we go and when will we go? And then we'll cover some notes around community and what that means. And after that, Roxy will take us through tips on pre-trip planning and communication. Next, Devin will dive into the juicy details of the logistics. And lastly, we'll get into our Q&A session, which I'm sure many of you are just eager to get all your questions answered. So please, when you think of your question, just pop it into the chat. Carmen will be tracking all of them, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Also, please note that we are speaking from our lived experiences and sharing our insights, or sharing our knowledge base from our own travel. So you'll hear a lot of personal insights, and most of the information that we're sharing today is actually in the Ambassador Guide, available online in PDF format. You should have received a link for it. You can open that up and follow along with us if you'd like. But that's all to say, you don't need to take notes unless you really want to. I take copious notes, and otherwise I will forget everything I learn. And just another reminder that this webinar will be recorded, so please only engage to your comfort level. You don't need to turn your camera on, although it'd be nice to see some familiar faces. And you are always welcome to reach out to Adventure Cycling after the webinar with any questions, if putting yourself on the chat or on blast in front of how many people we got now, 50 something people. Putting your question in front of all of these folks is not the most comforting thing for you. Okay. All right, today we are joined by our esteemed, illustrious, and perhaps familiar panelists if you tune into an adventure cycling webinar before, and my dear friends who I'll let introduce themselves. Can you all share with the people who you are, where you're currently based, how long you've been bike touring, and what your favorite touring bike is? Let's start with Devin.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you to Carmen and Roxy for being here and for allowing me to share space with you on the internet tonight. I'm Devin. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently residing on the ancestral lands of the Muskogee Creek Nation, today known as Atlanta, Georgia. Consider myself a connector, event planner, and advocate for BIPOC folks in cycling. And I currently manage Radical Adventure Riders Atlanta, which is a bike camping group and community for folks who identify as women, trans, femme, and or non-binary. I've been bike touring since 2018. And my favorite touring bike is my 46 centimeter Kona Rove NRBDL, which is just fancy terminology for small bike with really solid geometry. And I've been fortunate enough to upgrade to some wider handlebars and to get custom bags. And so it's currently my go-to for all of my bike packing trips. And I feel very privileged to get to ride that bike. Roxy?
Thanks, Devin. Sounds like a cool rig. My name's Roxy Robles. My pronouns are she, her. I reside on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically Duwamish, now known as Seattle. I consider myself a cyclist and a writer. I recently released a book about bike touring called An Introduction to Bike Touring. You can get it on my website, feelsonwheels.net. I started bike touring when I realized it wasn't that different from hauling groceries up and down Seattle hills. So that was like 4 years ago. It's certainly my favorite thing to do in my free time. And my primary touring bike is also Kona. It's a Sutra. It's really rugged. I love it. Steel is real. Jess. Oh, Carmen.
Carmen first. It's okay.
Hey everybody, I'm Carmen Aiken. I use they and she pronouns. I am the bike overnights event coordinator for the Adventure Cycling Association. I've only been here for 3 months. I may have heard from a lot of you about being a bike overnights ambassador. I promise I will get back to you this fall when Bike Your Park Day is over. I guess I started going on bike trips in like 2014 on and off. My favorite, I am originally from Chicago, which some of the ancestral lands there are the Miami, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe. And yeah, my favorite bike I've gone on a bike tour with probably is my old single speed Schwinn Varsity that I no longer have because it was awesome and it was blue and it was really fun to ride. So Jess, I'm gonna bring it to you really quick.
Yes, the old bikes. I mean, I have a newer bike also, but I love the old bikes. Hi again, my name is Jess. I use she, they pronouns. I too live and work on Coast Salish territories in what is now known as Seattle. And I am a proud public servant working on making multimodal transportation more accessible and equitable through engineering, which is what I do for work. And I also organize through anti-racist lines within city government to make more equitable change. I've been bike camping for about 5 years now. And my favorite touring bike is my 1984 Specialized Sequoia that has been converted to a 650B wheel set because I'm small also, and it fits wider tires in there. So it's really become my do everything, go anywhere rig. I could probably cyclocross with it, although it's got down tube shifters and that probably wouldn't be as fun, but it could do it. Okay, so Carmen's gonna lead us in some ground rules before we get started.
Yeah, so the Adventure Cycling Association, these are community agreements, especially as we begin to do the extremely necessary work of creating a truly equitable and accessible and inclusive bike travel community and become a better part of that bike travel community, especially acknowledging that we've been part of a pretty problematic industry for a long time. So for this meeting, we ask that you come curious, that you listen for understanding, and bigotry is not tolerated. If I see it, you're out of the chat. But I hope that I don't see that tonight. So that would be great. I'm going to transition into our guide in the Bike Overnights program. And as I mentioned, Adventure Cycling is honestly just starting its journey of trying to be a better member of the bike travel community by making sure that the community and accessing and being included in bike travel is actually happening. Because as we all know, sometimes it can be really intimidating, and the bike industry and bike travel has not actually been welcoming or supportive, especially of Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, trans, femme folks, as well as gender non-conforming folks, and people with disabilities, amongst others. So Bike Overnights is the first step, one of the first steps in doing this. And one of those things has been creating this guide, planning and leading a bike overnight, which we hope people can use to start and create really safe and great spaces for beginners. We have gotten a lot of feedback from folks who want to be involved in leading short trips, and we hope this is a way for people to do that in an extremely responsible and respectful and fun way, just because it can be intimidating.
Oh, Carmen cut off.
Oh no!
You want to just repeat that last line that you were saying?
Yeah, we just want to make sure that we give y'all resources you need to create some good trips. So definitely download it. Links in the chat. I'll provide it again later.
Yay. Thank you, Carmen. And I want to take this moment to say, we are all coming from many different places of the world right now. I just came off of a full day of work. So, transparent facilitation means that we're going to do our best and we're going to have some fun while we're here. Sometimes the internet really wants to just take a break. Sometimes our bodies do and our brains do, but we're all here to learn from each other. So why you're here. In the guide, you'll find tons of information to help you plan the logistics of your trips, and then also lots of sprinkled throughout the guide on leadership as well. But rather than us giving you a lecture on the document that you can just read on your own, let's hear from our ambassadors themselves. So our first question is, why do you bike camp? What does it mean for you? Let's start with Roxy.
Bike camping started as a way for me to feel independent and strong in my own body. But since I've been putting together rides, leading rides, and teaching others, it's turned into a way for me to be interdependent in community and to reparent myself by teaching others.
Yes, that resonates. How about for you, Devin? Why do you do it?
Yeah, so bike camping has been a place for community for me, and also similar to Roxy, a time to discover inner strength, and it's a time where I meditate, and an opportunity to experience nature, doing a thing that I love. And in a lot of ways, it's sort of a quiet rebellion against the systems that tell me that I'm not supposed to be in this space. And when I know that Black and brown folks have been in nature and experiencing the outdoors all along.
All along. For me, I think bike camping is my escape away from the hustle of the city. I mentioned I live in Seattle, and I also find meditative movement just from going on long bike rides. And I really love camping as like the destination for bike overnights, because I love to camp among the trees, and I really find being on the land like just recharges my soul. So a lot of the times when I can, I'll go on solo trips. But I also have been finding so much satisfaction taking folks out for their first time and witnessing people just realize their power after struggling together and really encouraging each other throughout the journey. So no matter what your reason is, audience, I encourage you to take some time on why biking is important for you and why leading a trip especially is important for you as well. You'll want to consider the positionality of your own identity and the group that you're leading, and then bring that intentionality into your trip planning itself. Bike touring with the group is about forming trusting relationships so that everyone can enjoy the experience no matter what trials and tribulations you go through, and finding those magical moments in between. So our next question is, who are you going to ride with? It's about the groups themselves. Will you go solo? Maybe thinking of a group in mind already. You got some friends that are interested, maybe some strangers who have seen you on the road commuting, being like, oh, you got a lot of gear. You look like you're camping. Who are you going to go with, Devin?
Yeah, so this photo actually is so near and dear to my heart. This photo was taken on February 29th, 2020, right before COVID. And so that was our last big group of like 11 people going camping. And it was like the most magical, epic trip. And the campsite had like a grill and water and a bathroom, which was really lovely. So I do a lot of primitive camping now, but I love this picture. So I've gone with friends and more recently strangers, given the fact that I manage a bike camping community, bike packing community, excuse me, or bike camping community. But those strangers have become friends. And so I would say I often go in groups. I think, to be honest, bike camping solo as a Black woman in the backwoods of Georgia, which is, my backyard, is not something that I feel completely safe doing quite yet. And so I'm looking forward to building up some confidence over the next few months so that I can bike travel solo, but I'm just not there yet. So I'm very grateful for my community and all of these trips.
Yes. How about for you, Roxy? Who you ride with?
My first bike tour was solo, but since then I realized I really prefer to travel in a group. Yeah, this is a sweet photo from a Memorial Day trip we took last year or earlier this year. It was really sweet, really like gentle. We were kind of like easing one another into kind of like bike touring season. I used to tour with a lot of strangers. I would just publicize trips I'd planned on social media. And it was a really great way to meet a lot of people across the Seattle bike community. But the last 2 years, I've just gotten a lot more introverted and a lot more rooted in, a smaller core of friends that I like touring with. So I do go with new folks and show them the ropes every once in a while, but I'm a little bit more introverted nowadays, and I'm more picky about who I ride with.
Yeah, definitely. I can hardly stand being by myself, but that's why I need to take quick solo trips by myself just to feel like I am back and present in my own body. But when I can do those solo trips, I try to go to places that are familiar, so that I don't have to think too hard about the logistics and just focus on being present. And as I got better at bike camping and learn how to trust my instincts better, I've also really wanted to share this experience of getting outdoors by bike on my own power, on your own power, with other people in my community. So for me, bike camping is about organizing rides to get people of the global majority and queer folks taking space in an industry that doesn't accurately reflect the people who actually ride bikes. So that's what it means for me. And thank you all for sharing your stories too. For the audience, when you plan your trip, you want to deeply consider who you want to be on your team. Bike camping can be really stressful on our bodies and really test the limits of our our strength. So you want to think about who will join you, your friends or your family, folks in your community, people in other riding groups, etc. And if you find yourself wondering if there's anyone else in your area who shares your values and is interested in doing this crazy thing, you're most likely not the only one. Know that you can always start your own writing group, no matter how big or small it starts off as. I know some of us here, we've just sent random email blasts to our friends who may be slightly interested and, come with caution, but that's what being a good ride leader is about too. So you've thought about who will join your crew, and now you got to figure out where you're going to go. Given America's history of colonization, we must acknowledge that our ability to play and travel through our country's natural beauty is only afforded by the land stewardship of the First Nations peoples since time immemorial. If you are not a Native person to this country, like myself, we are considered guests and must honor Indigenous sovereignty like we would if we traveled to any other country. So to find out where you're riding, because you may or may not know, be sure to check this really great resource, native-land.ca. It's the interactive GIS map. GIS is Geographic Information Systems, that shows the geographic areas of where Indigenous lands are. And if you zoom in on those areas, then you can find more web links and information about the land and the people as well. And for people who like podcasts or auditory learners, I highly recommend the podcast Within Without. the episode is called Riding on Turtle Island. And you'll hear from Indigenous writers and other writers with that insight to why there is such a responsibility while traveling through Native territories. And be sure to check out the sections in the ambassador guide that have sections on Indigenous relations woven throughout the whole guide itself. So when you're figuring out where to go, there are a ton of things to consider, like the group skill level, if you know it. But when you're in doubt, just go for a beginner-friendly route. You can do a harder thing on your own or with another group, or just come up with a series of rides, beginner, medium, difficult, whatever. You want to consider the riding terrain, if it's paved or gravel, and you want to consider if there's any bike facilities, like a bike lane, a good shoulder on the highway, if it's logging or gravel roads, or if it's trail, like a multi-use trail. Then you want to look at the elevation as well, and the distance. In the guide itself, there's a nice table that shows how far you can go depending on how much weight you're carrying. So that's a nice handy reference. And you also want to think about if you're going to camp, if you're going to glamp, which is just fancy camping, if you're staying in a hostel or in a hotel, bike touring. We might say interchangeably with bike camping or bike touring, but know that you don't always have to camp while you're doing these things. So I know we have a variety of travels as well. So tell us, co-presenters or panelists, where is your favorite place you've traveled to and why? Let's start with Roxy.
I love all kinds of like waterfront touring that we are fortunate to be able to do here in Coast Salish territories. I think my favorite bike trip in recent memory was a trip that a couple of us took at the end of May this year. That was the picture that we showed earlier, to Tiliab, Skagit, and Stillaguamish lands, now known as Whidbey and Lopez Island. We just used, the non-reservable hiker-biker sites, and we all took really good care of one another and shared responsibilities for logistics and food. And my friend Jean is just a total gourmand food wizard and brought like a whole gigantic Mediterranean mezza. It took like 3 of us to spread out over our panniers to put together, but it was such a joy to get to a campsite and just eat all this incredible Mediterranean food after a day of biking.
Yeah. What about for you, Devin? Where do you like to
go? Not to sound cliche, but I do love all of my trips. I feel so privileged to be able to take that time and disconnect. And this photo actually was in the last issue of Adventure Cycling magazine. And this was the trip that I went on. So this was my first trip that I traveled outside of Georgia for, which was really special. We did a loop outside of Arlene, Montana, which is where the Garden of 1,000 Buddhas is. And I was just overwhelmed by the spirit and energy of that place. And we had some of the most intense climbs I've ever done, but they opened up into the most expansive landscapes. And that was such different terrain for me, having only really backpacked in Georgia, which Georgia is also beautiful. Don't sleep on Georgia. And I really enjoyed Montana. I also saw my first and what I hope will be my last grizzly bear, and a lot of wildlife that was just different from what we have here. And so that was a treat. And then had some huckleberries like just off of, the side of the road. I was biking with my friend Sarah here, and I was like, it smells like blueberries. And she's like, oh my gosh. And we saw a bunch of huckleberries. And then, 5 minutes later, after she explains to me how to use the bear spray, we saw a bear very far away. But yeah, that was a lot of feelings. And that really sort of solidified in my mind and heart that I needed to be doing this more regularly out, in a number of different places. So
Yes, it is kind of addiction that um, I just find myself wanting to do over and over again, no matter how challenging it is. For me, oh gosh, I forgot this photo's here. This photo was actually not on a overnight trip. It was many nights. And this photo was taken on the last day, thankfully. Oh my gosh, it was one of the hardest things I've done. So do your homework when you figure out where you're going, if there's going to be live logging happening in your area. But for my bike overnights, I prefer going to places that have a variety of things to do once you actually get there. That's really nice for group trips as well. So you're not just, well, you're all hanging out, but the place that I really love to go here in Coast Salish territories is on the Port Gamble Sklallam Reservation. It's a state park, Kitsap Memorial. It's my favorite place to take beginners because the route is beautiful and relatively easy, and the hiker-biker campsites are nestled among these ginormous trees. And there's also a really fun forest that's only a few miles away from the park with tons of single track and gravel routes nearby to session like over and over again when there's extra time in the day. So I really love to just like either go swimming once you get to camp or have a nice fire, things like that. So if you're feeling really overwhelmed by all of this, just know that you can use routes that adventure cycling has already created, like sections of them, because I know adventure cycling has very, very long routes over multiple days. There are other GPS navigation tools where folks have had time to research the routes for you. And Roxy will mention some of those other navigation tools in a little bit. So figuring out where to go is probably one of the more time-intensive decisions to make, but then you'll have to figure out when you're going to go, and that entirely depends on where you live. Going during an off season, like a shoulder season, might provide better options to camp because there aren't as many people out, and there may also be hiker-biker spots available. And you may think that it's most advantageous to take it. Sorry, let me start over. You may find that the most obvious choice to do a bike overnight is on a long holiday weekend. But if you do this, please be mindful of your impact on Indigenous communities because everyone else is traveling during this time as well. And that could really impede Indigenous populations from getting the resources, especially while COVID is still among us. So we'll kick it back to our panelists again. When is your favorite time of the year to travel and why? How about for you, Devin?
Yeah, so living in Atlanta, Georgia, anytime it's not humid, which is, special time of about 2 weeks in late fall, that is hard to predict. I like that balance of being able to bike in a long sleeve, but then not have to use my puffy at night to sleep. So that is a really slim window. And I'll also echo Jess that finding campsites during that time is also tricky because it's the best weather. So just booking ahead is really, as much as possible, is really beneficial. But yeah, I would say right around mid to late October, sometimes early November, depending. It does get cold here, believe it or not, actual cold. So
I believe it. How about for you, Roxy? When do you like to travel?
My favorite is late June. It's when you can really start to act on what we call sun panic here in the Pacific Northwest, because around like March, April, the sun starts to come back and everybody starts freaking out a little bit. And then, June comes and you get some dry days. And so it's just like the most exciting time to ride. And it's usually warm enough to sleep with just a down quilt. So, and not super hot during the day. So those all make it my favorite time.
Yeah. For me, I think my favorite time of the year to ride is around this time. That first slide with like the pumpkin patches, that was from this ride, the photo that we're seeing now, because it's shoulder season, the leaves are starting to change, and school's back in session, so there aren't as many people around. Most folks are done with their summer traveling, so also less crowded campsites, and the omnipresence of rain also means less crowded campgrounds. So I'm the kind of person that would take that risk. And actually on this trip, we got rained in, but it's the Pacific Northwest, so it was only like a gentle mist. Yay. Thank you for sharing story with all of us. I always love hearing them. And you, audience, will also have many stories after your trips, as I'm sure you already do. We want to share some notes around the community that you are building as a ride leader. And you've figured out all the big stuff, who you're going to go with, where, and when. And as a ride leader, your responsibility is to collect and share information with your group so that all of your riders will feel supported on their journey. And as we know, biking in general, and especially bike touring with a group, can be really challenging. It requires mental and physical stamina that can push people to their edge or become a moving meditation, like it so often is for me, and then everything in between. So it's really important to take breaks often. I often call bike camping a snackathon because it's an excuse to eat everything. Take plenty of breaks for stretching, hydrating, and checking in with each other. And as a ride leader, you want to set a good example to model what good leadership is. And I'm going to fly through these next couple of points here. And want to point to extra attention again to the sections in the guide around having good relations with the Native communities that you may encounter on your travels, and do your homework ahead of time before you go. And like we did in our presentation earlier, you may consider setting some ground rules for your group as well, so that everyone feels like their needs are heard and will be met. Because so often the group can consist of complete strangers. You know, I find myself in those circles sometimes, especially in Seattle. And it's important to cultivate an environment of trust. So if you're not a person of the global majority, also known as a person of color, you got to understand that biking for recreation has never been geared toward our bodies being on bikes, and our presence in outdoor and biking spaces have not always been welcomed by those in the industry and by onlookers too. So as a ride leader, you should dedicate some time to learn how to take action if interpersonal issues, interpersonal conflicts come up. Hopefully not, but you know, these things happen. Check out the ambassador guide for more on this topic in general. There is a ton of free online resources around compassionate language and de-escalation, things of that nature. But let's hear from our co-presenters about their communities. Devin, you want to share a little bit more about RAR Atlanta?
Yeah, thank you, Jess, for going through that. That's a really important aspect of this, and happy to see it reflected in the guide. So Radical Adventure Riders Atlanta, formerly known as WTF Bike Explorers Atlanta, and shout out to Kimberly Wyman, who's here, who organizes in the New York area, and who also was one of the first people I reached out to support me and assist with getting it off the ground. And I'm so grateful to still be in community with Kimberly and to have her as a resource and a friend. So thanks, Kimberly. So WWF RAR Atlanta was launched in 2019. And this year we became a part of Radical Adventure Riders as a whole when they decided to launch chapters. And we essentially aim to create supportive and open spaces that welcome femme, trans women, and non-binary cyclists. In my chapter, and I think in RAR as a whole, we're really centering Black and brown folks as well, and trans folks in that work, just because, as Jess said, it's super important and we're often forgotten about in that space. And our group is specifically for folks of all fitness levels. So we end up getting a lot of beginners, but any range of fitness and experience. And so we host monthly happy hours, monthly bike rides. We also do a number of skill share classes like bike camping 101, navigation, basic bike maintenance, layering for winter riding, those sorts of things, and are getting ready to launch a gear library. It's hard to do all these things with a full-time job, but here we are, getting ready to launch a gear library, which I'm super excited about, for folks to rent and try out gear who want to try bike camping but don't want to make that financial commitment, because you could do it and not enjoy it. And, you know, having that opportunity to test it out is something that I think is really important. And then we're also hopefully later this fall launching an open shop, which is essentially a space for folks to come in and work on bikes, learn things that's free of cis men and also free of that sort of bike shop energy. Sometimes, you know, folks like us might come into a bike shop and, you know, you get looked at or you don't fit a sort of cycling look. And we're really trying to create a courageous space, free of that sort of, free of assumption and judging and sort of the typical stuff you see in the cycling industry. So I'm super, super just honored and privileged and so grateful for the opportunity to create this space and provide resources to my community.
I love it. I can't wait till I can ride with you all. How about for you, Roxy?
Thanks, Devin. That was really great. I also appreciate that you mentioned that, yeah, we are community leaders, but we also have full-time jobs. So we really do this because we love it. So Jess and I organize here in Seattle with Friends on Bikes. We're FOB. And FOB was co-founded by Molly Sugar in Portland, Oregon. She is also one of the co-founders of Radical Adventure Riders. And the group has grown to have sibling chapters in Toronto as well. So it's Toronto, Seattle, and Portland. The group brings together and supports cyclists at the intersections of trans, two-spirit, women, intersex, and gender nonconforming BIPOC identities and BIPOC identities through social rides, bike camping, trips, and supportive Slack group. And we had a picture of an intro to bike camping that I led before our first bike camping trip. It's been really wonderful to get it back off the ground. The group experienced kind of a hiatus after the original leader passed away, unfortunately. But yeah, I think we're really excited to see where the group goes and to kind of cultivate a new kind of crop of community leaders. I already see people kind of stepping up, since I know I have had pretty low capacity this summer. Yeah, awesome to be in it.
Yes. That photo was our first bike camping trip with Friends on Bikes. Certainly the two that we've mentioned are just two of many. For a list of other BIPOC and femme, trans, and or woman-centered riding groups and organizations, refer to the resource list at the end of the guide. It's definitely not an exhaustive list, but it's a really good start. And now we're getting into the meat of our presentation 52 minutes later. Thank you all for sticking it out with us. I just want to say we are going to have a 5-minute break before the Q&A session, and we're going to go until the half hour, 6:30. So Roxy, take it away.
Alrighty, thanks, Jess. So I'm going to be talking about pre-trip planning and communications, and these are all, considerations we recommend to make your trip really safe and inclusive. So you're probably going to want to start with your route planning before, like, kind of as the first thing, because that's going to dictate a lot of how you communicate to your group going forward. So and a note on route planning, it is an art and it can take some trial and error and failure to understand what methods and considerations you need. But I usually start with where you want to go. Are there biker only sites? Is there a beautiful view you want to see, a special landmark, incredible old growth forest? Think about what you want to see and what you can do that's enriching for your group. And then how you will get there will depend on a few things and kind of the ability of the group that you're planning for. So are there dedicated bike trails? Are there dedicated bike lanes? What is the ability of the group? Can you take gravel forest roads or unpaved roads on public lands? Or, does the ability of the group or your interest kind of dictate that you stick to paved roads? And then within that, you're going to have to think about elevation gain because that's going to affect the ability it's going to affect who can participate to some extent and how long it's going to take to get there. So think about what elevation the people in your group or the group that you're aiming for would be able to handle, with fully loaded bikes across the mileage that it takes to get to your destination. Another consideration within all of that is how long it's going to take you to get there, including your breaks and rest time. You'll probably, I think on some of our group rides, we stop every like 10 to 15 miles for maybe 15 or 20 minutes just for snacks and water. And you have to think about how much daylight is going to be available at the time of year. That's especially pressing in the Pacific Northwest where, in the spring and the fall, our days are still kind of short. So in finding a route and in finding the elevation, I like to use an app called Ride with GPS. There's an example there on the screen. It's really geared towards bike travel. And so I'll, make an A to B route, and then I might put a control point on there if I'm not 100% sold on the route it gives me, and play around to see if there are options with less elevation gain, different terrain, or maybe more interesting places to stop and take breaks. I recommend Ride with GPS because it gives really accurate elevation information. You can use Google Maps to get a good A to B for bike routes, but it averages elevation. So the elevation gain is not usually very accurate on Google Maps. That's really important. I think I've already said this like 3 or 4 times, but understanding the elevation profile is really important to understanding the difficulty of the ride. I think you'll find with newer cyclists and newer bike packers that they won't always understand what the amount of elevation on a given route means. So it's up to you as the ride leader to kind of explain that as a factor of the difficulty of the ride and, kind of triangulate that with their ability. And then if Ride with GPS isn't giving you what you want, you can always bite off routes from the library on Ride with GPS or other bike blogs or bike clubs in your area. You don't always have to make a route from scratch. So other considerations, you probably want to factor or create a place to get snacks or meal items and plan for a longer stop there, since it's really common for people to need to refuel at some point. Also consider where someone might safely bail on the route so they can navigate home on their own or with a pal. So what is the last place with major services, buses, or, in some cases, cell service so that they can call someone. and make sure you let people know, if you're feeling tired or you're feeling like you don't want to go all the way, this is kind of your cutoff point. So you need to make a decision by the time we get to X location. And then you're going to need to also plan for how you're going to describe this route. And so that's going to include the distance, the elevation, the surface types, if there's dedicated bike trails or lanes, whether there'll be highways or fast traffic, and also map out where there may be stressful or high traffic intersections or interchanges, difficult road or bridge crossings, and also the nature of the break spots, as well as where to get food and water, how far between each of your break spots. Just, this may sound like a lot, but always err on the side of over communication. Just remember, you are a leader here, and it's up to you to make sure that people feel safe. And usually over communication helps people feel safer, and it makes the ride more accessible. So then you got your route all mapped up, you've typed up your description. Where are you going to meet your group? Choose a starting location that's not too far from the start of your route, maybe close to transit, easy parking, or bike facilities, preferably with access to food or last minute snacks and supplies, since people might be leaving early in the morning, forget X, Y, and Z thing. Bike shops, coffee shops, grocery store parking lots are always good options. All right, it's a lot of information. So you're still not ready to announce your trip to the world. You need to consider some time-dependent issues, and make sure you have some lead time to prep your participants. So schedule a pre-trip meeting or two for folks to meet one another and ask questions about the route, and maybe do an intro to the route and even a little fix a flat or bike maintenance session. It's a great time to talk through any concerns your participants might have and understand any accessibility or gear needs, since people may want to participate, but they don't have their own stove, or they don't have a sleeping bag or something like that. And it's a great time for people to meet one another, and maybe they can trade gear. Okay. So now you've scheduled those meetings, you have your route, it's safe, you've over communicated everything about it. Now you are ready to finalize and promote your trip. So we've talked a little bit about this, but email blasts, Facebook group pages, Slack groups, Google groups are all great platforms to share these out. I started just emailing anybody that might possibly be interested in bike trips. And for fob rides, I share on Instagram, Facebook, and Slack. I make a simple graphic with the date, time, theme of the ride as a first slide, and then screenshot the route for the second slide. We also use a standard set of criteria in the description that we use under the post. It's good for your rides, especially if you're doing, overnights, multi-day overnights, to require the confirmation of the participants. You'll see a screenshot of a form that Jess has developed to get information from participants. So you need to find a way. So she uses Google Forms. You just need to find some way to track and communicate with participants, whether it's through a group Facebook message, Slack channel, email thread, text thread, whatever it is. Require confirmation of participants so you can account for everyone throughout the trip, and you can plan for campsite reservations and any kind of food or anything. And so the last thing I'll say is ahead of the trip, agree on group rules and norms to ground the group together. A practice I observed in Jess's planning, which is really inspiring, is in this Google form, Jess will ask participants for any agreements or needs ahead of the trip. On the last FOB trip, for example, someone requested in the form there be no talk around body image or dieting. And having that communicated ahead of time to the whole group, whoever that was, that helps them feel safe. And it also helps create a norm within the group that topic is, just not on the table. And it's this type of attention to needs that can make your trip a really successful one. The agreements also do not have to be set in stone, once you depart for the trip. Invite folks to ask for what they need as the trip progresses, as their needs may evolve. All right. That was a mouthful. I'm going to kick it over to Devin for more details on trip planning.
Thank you, Roxy. And I just want to co-sign and cannot stress enough that pre-trip meeting. It's something that I think just should be standard and customary in any trip planning process because it's hugely useful. So I'm going to go through budget, food, health concerns, gear, and bike prep. And as we mentioned earlier, we're all speaking from our personal experiences and our processes. And so I'm not going to say every single thing you need to know about all of these areas, but I'm going to give you insights into what I've done, experiences we've had. So just keep that in mind if you feel the need to provide feedback. So budget. Really on budgeting, the biggest thing to determine is where you're going to stay and how you're going to eat. How will payment be divided and provided to the leader? Make sure to discuss this ahead of time. I know that with some trips that I do, folks aren't always able to commit, $20, $30, $40 around supporting campsite or food. So figuring out cost, how that might be shared, if there's a way to support one another in advance. And I know that campsite pricing can range from $5 to $37 a night here in Georgia. Some campsites also have minimum stays. I know in Georgia, often some campsites, especially in the fall, have a 2-night minimum, and you might just be doing 1 night. So keeping that in mind, that you may need to book for 2 nights, even though you're staying for 1. And just as a trip leader, making sure to communicate any and all expected costs, and whether there'll be options to buy prepared food at the grocery store or at a gas station, whether folks will need to prepare stuff on their own. I think folks have preferences, so that pre-trip meeting is going to be really integral to figuring that kind of stuff out. Food, my favorite part of trip planning. I really just ride to eat. And this can be done any way you want. There's no right way to provide food. Making sure to determine what's available from the budget and the preferences of the group. Cooking all of your own meals requires a lot of gear and preparation. And buying all of your meals is more pricey. So figuring out kind of where folks are. Some folks might have food restrictions and concerns, vegan, gluten-free, that kind of thing. Also, we're living in the time we're living in. Maybe sharing food isn't the move right now, unless it's something you're living in the same household with. So just keeping those things in mind. This is where sharing gear and setting expectations around how meals are prepared can be really helpful. And again, that pre-trip meeting, this should be one of your to-do list items during that time. And I think also not everyone is experienced cooking food. So just figuring out kind of what people are feeling in advance of that. And as a ride leader, it's really your role and opportunity to gauge these different interests and needs. And then health concerns. So that is sort of a broad one, obviously. So I'm going to say a few things here. At a very base level, on the note of food, making sure you have enough to eat. Biking with a fully loaded bike on different terrain is just like you expending energy. And so often folks maybe aren't as prepared around fueling as they might be when just doing a commuter ride in the city or something like that. So as a ride leader, I always pack extra snacks. You just never know who might reach that hangry mode before they know that they're hangry. I do that all the time. So that's just something I like to have as a backup just in case. Reminding folks to just snack throughout the day, eating every 45 minutes to an hour, something a general rule I like to keep. And then allergies. Maybe someone has an ant allergy or a peanut allergy. Do they have an EpiPen? Those are things that would be really good to know before you go off into the woods. And remember to hydrate. That feels so obvious, but it's something that's often forgotten about. And then making sure to take breaks for the bathroom. doing check-ins. I like to check in every 10 to 15 miles, maybe less, depending on, the distance and the terrain and where people are at. I think that pre-trip meeting is also a great time for someone to say, hey, it's my first trip. I'm really nervous. I don't know how I'm going to perform physically, how I'm going to feel. And just keeping that in mind as a ride leader, because the greatest thing you can do in that space is to be sensitive to folks' needs. And then I'm just going to go ahead and say this, we're living in the time of COVID, and COVID safety is important. Maybe doing single packet meals, not sharing is important, as I mentioned before. Keeping hand sanitizer handy, making sure your riders have it, adding that to your packing list just generally, but just using that as much as possible, and washing hands as much as you can, if that's available to you. Also, COVID's going to be around for a while, and don't assume people are vaccinated. Don't vaccine shame folks. A way around this, ask people to bring a mask and respect others. So I think that's just something that, don't assume people's situations. I think that's a theme running through this presentation, but just keeping that in mind, especially with something like COVID-19. And also having some sort of protocol if something happens on the trip. So this could be something as simple, not as simple, but something like a conversation with someone who has a peanut allergy, has an EpiPen, talking through what that scenario looks like if they need to administer an EpiPen themselves, what's the next step there? Or if someone falls off their bike and gets injured, I think being prepared with a first aid kit is key here, but just talking through protocols of what you might do. Do you have emergency contact information for folks who are on the trip solo, maybe not with a friend they know or not with a partner? So just really having those sort of conversations to be able to mitigate as much as possible in advance before you're out in the woods together, possibly semi-remote spaces. Okay, and then gear. So depending on the tour, if you're camping the entire time or if you're cooking the entire time, that's going to essentially present different gear needs. One thing I like to do on my trips, we often have beginners, is we share gear. So maybe share carrying of gear, excuse me. So maybe, someone is not used to riding as much and wants to, someone else carry their cook set, that sort of thing. Or maybe, I'm going to bring the tarps for everyone for dinner time, that sort of thing. So just being able to share, all 7 ride folks maybe don't need a first aid kit. I recently did an Knowles Wooford training, so my first aid kit is really robust. So I could probably save like 7 people, but that's not going to be the case for everyone. Knock on wood, I hope to not be in that situation. But and then making sure you have the right tools. I actually use this comprehensive drawing, which is in one of the slides here, that was done by Allie Mabry, who is the lead designer of Adventure Cycling for the magazine. And it's a great go-to for just being able to check stuff off. I think it's very intense in a good way, and that I don't usually always need all these things in this, but it's a great reference point for a range of trips. And then I think just checking in with folks who are beginners who may be nervous to carry all of the weight. This is also something that feels just looking up the weather to make sure that you have the right gear for the trip. I think I always carry a raincoat and a pair of oh shit socks just in case something goes down. Tuck it like in the very back of my seat bag. And if, just that extra pair of fuzzy socks around the campfire, making sure that if it rains, something unexpected happens, I have a pair of warm socks because it's a really comfortable feeling for me. And then extra layering, it's just something to keep in mind. It also rains a lot here, so I always have a raincoat. And then bike prep. So I want to sort of drive home the point that any bike you have, you can take on a bike trip. Don't feel like you need to spend a lot of money on a bougie bike or a bike that has all the bells and whistles. I've said this 1,000 times in previous conversations. My first bike packing trip was with a 1989 Specialized rock hopper off of Craigslist that was $90, and it was perfect. And I had a backpack and a saddlebag that I borrowed on one side. So you can really do whatever you need to do. just remembering that the terrain and distance of your trip is going to affect how your bike handles. So if someone is on your trip and they're packing their bike for the first time, make sure they ride around the neighborhood with that bike fully loaded a couple times. Because if you're on a bike that doesn't fit or is uncomfortable, trust and believe you will feel it on 10, 15, 20 miles of off-road biking on a heavy loaded bike. And then making sure to bring extra tools for any bike issues or bike needs, making sure that riders are familiar with working on their bike. In that pre-trip session, you could do, I think Roxy, you may mention this, like fix the flat session or sort of a maintenance overview, check in with folks, see what sort of bike they have, figure out if you can get resources to support them learning more about their bike if it's their first time. I think going through the ABCs of bike training, I'm sure folks have heard this in other spaces, but checking air, brakes, and then cranks, chain, and cassettes, just making, those are kind of like the big things, I think, where something might go wrong if your bike is sort of not tuned up. And then doing this pre-trip meeting sort of in advance, such that if you need to make adjustments for participants, there's a little bit of lead time there. So I like to do that pre-trip meeting a week or so out, just to give some lead time there. And just, I also, pro tip, bring a mechanic. Just kidding, but not kidding. I have friends who have mechanic skills who I bring on trips usually just as a safety thing, because while I'm a trip leader, I only know how to work my bike. So just keeping that in mind, making sure there's some knowledge sharing happening in advance of the trip around sort of bike maintenance and upkeep. I will now pass it to Jess.
Wow. So much information. Y'all are pros. We can talk about this stuff in our sleep, as we've said numerous times. I just want to plug Roxy wrote a book on bike camping 101. So you can find that, or maybe you want to throw your link in the chat for everyone. Roxy also did a presentation for adventure cycling a few weeks ago as well. It's just a well of knowledge. And Devin is just like, so like, I love how nerdy that you get on like gear and like taking care of people and like make sure everyone has what they need. It's such a good learning environment for people, I think. Yeah, thank you all so much. So now you're on your bike overnight trip itself. I'm gonna fly through these because we got 15 minutes, y'all. Just like I said, lots of information. And we're actually not gonna take a break. We're just gonna go through. Is that okay, Devin? With thumbs? Yeah, okay, cool. So you're on your bike overnight. Make sure you share the ACA absolutes if it is a adventure cycling event that is no pace lines. Bikes are heavy, you don't want to crash into each other. Always stop 10 feet off of the road. If you can, keep a helmet on your head when your wheels are spinning, and use hand signals and call out hazards. Make sure you review your riding plan and map, as Roxy said. Over communicate, can't stress that enough. And make sure to share your phone number in case folks get separated, and if there's a signal where you are, then they can reach you. As always, take lots of breaks. I say eat a food before you get hungry, drink water before you get thirsty, and check your bikes to make sure they're holding up okay. And always, whenever you're out, even in the urban parts, right? You might run into some wildlife or doggies. So check the resource on some tips about that. And make sure to remember your responsibilities as a ride leader. And these responsibilities are to the land, to leave no trace, to respect the flora and fauna, to make land acknowledgements, and recognize the cultural stewardship of indigenous populations, indigenous peoples. Remember your responsibility to each other, to support and understand each other's challenges and joys. as well as helping each other. And your responsibility to yourself. You got to listen to your body, and you got to hold yourself accountable for being on native lands. You're here, we've inherited where we are. We just got to do it. And make sure when you arrive to celebrate your journey. You worked so hard to get there. And to help each other just get situated and simmer down once you get to camp, help put up tents if folks are green to camping, all that stuff. And then after the trip, circle back to your group to get feedback. What could have gone better? What went really well? What are you looking forward to next time? And as always, if it is the Adventure Cycling Associated event, they would love to hear how it went and how they support you in your next ride as well. And that's our presentation. There's so much that we covered. Again, this is recorded, so don't worry if you didn't take lots of notes. It is now time for a Q&A session. I don't see any others coming in, so I think we have 3 or 4 of them. The first question is, as ride leaders, have you had any injuries or first aid moments that have been good lessons for you? This person has been thinking lately about how to prepare for possible incidents and make sure others feel prepared too. This is a good question. Does anyone want to take this on first? Maybe Devin, since you did your wilderness training.
Well, I haven't actually had any injuries, knock on wood, on an actual trip, but I think it's great to, in that pre-trip meeting, sort of designate, I think, so a couple of things. One, sometimes as the ride leader, it's just you. Maybe you're a group of like 4 beginners. And so not everyone is going to be comfortable to be like, a proxy or support person if something goes down. But in that pre-trip meeting, talking through maybe a communications plan or something to the effect of, hey, inviting a friend on the trip to be that second person to help with decision making, because sometimes with injuries, there's a lot of sort of expected things. Like if someone gets hurt, there's often the immediate like, let me go help this person get up, and like that's not what you should do, right? So having sort of a communications plan around like, okay, if someone gets hurt, what are we going to do if there's like a chain of command, kind of talking through those steps, because it's all hypothetical, of course, and just because I now have a very intense first aid kit, I think it's helpful to kind of, in that pre-trip meeting, talk through like what people have as far as resources to support an injury or help someone if something happens. But I think this is definitely an iterative process, because ideally, like, you want to be as prepared as possible, but you don't want to have stuff go down, right? So there's a balance there. But I think it's talking through a communications plan, who can sort of be a support when you're making decisions. And then emergency contacts, I think, is another piece of that. But I have not had an actual scenario where someone has been injured, truly. So I can't speak to that directly, but that's what I would recommend.
Mm-hmm. Roxy, do you want to respond to, or in the interest of time, we can move on to the next question?
I can't think of a time. I guess I've been lucky, knock on wood, but yeah, we can keep moving to the next.
Okay. I think I'll just add, like, prevention is the name of the game, especially if it's like bike related, like injuries, right? Like as Devin was saying, make sure you kind of know your bike, and make sure that everything is screwed on tight, nothing's going to fall off. Sometimes a bungee cord, if it's not like put on correctly, could get wrapped in your wheel, and that's bad news. That has happened to someone on my trip, and we just took a break, untangled it, did what we need to do, and luckily it was not the worst thing. So our next question is, I love the idea of actively asking for people's needs from the get-go. Do you have any other examples of needs that have been brought up? Roxy, what do you think?
I've definitely heard that, especially in like kind of mixed gender groups, from femme people being nervous about, if we have a mechanical or something, that maybe one of the men might kind of jump in and do stuff, even though, we should all be assuming that the person riding the bike is the expert on their own bike. So definitely had requests on trips I've led for, just being explicit about, like, we all need to ask before touching bikes and touching people, ask for consent around that. And then also just trying to have an attitude of curiosity with one another. And not assuming that you're the expert on any one topic, especially, when you're riding with strangers, which is, some of the rides that I've put together. So yeah, don't assume that you're the expert. Don't assume that you know best, just ask questions rather than kind of jumping into action. You know, not everything is an emergency. There are real emergencies, medical emergencies, like, Devin was talking about with health issues, but usually a flat tire is no total emergency, and you can let the person do it in their own way if need be.
Yeah. And I think I also want to add that whatever format you're using to gather information from your group from the get-go, I used a Google form for our trip, and one of the questions explicitly asked, do you have any access needs, right? Like Devin was mentioning, do you have an EpiPen that you need to use just in case of emergencies? Is there any topics, like subjects that are like a definitely no zone? We want to meet people where they're at in terms of their comfort level of engagement. And that's everything from our bodily needs to our psychological needs as well. And that's especially, I feel, relevant for everyone, but especially for people of the global majority. Okay. Our last question, I think it may have been answered already, but it was, how much time do you like to plan between the pre-trip meeting and the trip? Devin, I'll let you answer that. I think you had mentioned it.
Yeah, I'd say at least a week. I've actually done it like the Thursday before, but that was really just because I was in crisis mode and really busy. Shocker. But I like a week out because it just gives time for those adjustments. I think if it's feasible, obviously you're coordinating a number of schedules. So, in a perfect world, the trip is planned with enough advance notice that you can also plan that pre-trip meeting. So what I like to do is say, here's a trip we have planned. There's a, don't like to say mandatory, but a suggested pre-trip meeting in advance of this, and then list the date for that. And then for folks who can't do that, I often will just meet with them one-on-one and kind of go over what we ran through in the meeting, as close to that date as possible. But advanced planning is hard, so I get that too. It's just, depending on the level of your trip participants, that just gives, for me, is sort of a stress cushion, such that there's time to make those adjustments. So I'm not sort of running around right before a trip to get someone a new wheel or whatever, if that happens.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Like for our bike needs, right? Like you want to, so many of the bike shops in Seattle are just like so busy that their schedules are filled like weeks out. So I really encourage you as a ride leader to communicate with your group to try to get your bike looked at as far in advance as possible. And if not, hopefully there are some resources or tools nearby, like a bike kitchen that you may have access to. Maybe you have a friend that has access to it to do some of the repairs on your own, or help somebody do the repairs if it's like a quick thing. All right. Wow, I can feel the energy from the interwebs, just like everyone's just kind of like settling in and absorbing all of this information. And we're coming down to the last minute here. And I want to give Carmen the chance to sort of close us out with any last words from Adventure Cycling. And again, just thank you, Roxy and Devin, so much for joining me on this presentation. I love being friends with you and just like working with you like this too. I feel very much in community, and really honored that I get to do it, that I know you. Go ahead, Carmen, take us away.
For sure. I thank you so much, Jess. Somebody mentioned it in our chat box, but Jess was an incredibly invaluable contributor, editor, writer, patient, human being working on this guide. So when you read this guide, just know that it would not exist without Jess. And we very much appreciate all of their hard work. So thank you all so much. Roxy has been incredible ambassador and steward of our community. Devin is an incredible coordinator and connector. We are really lucky. We are really lucky to have so many people who are going to be leading trips this weekend. If leading a trip is something you're interested in, I definitely want to hear from you. If I don't get back to you right away, I promise that I will. But just so you're inspired, try and sign up for Biker Park Day this weekend. It is a fee-free day at all national parks and national monuments. Just letting you know that. And yeah, we have some great rides going on in Chicago, in Madison. We've had some in New Haven. There's going to be some in DFA. Carla, I'm really excited about that. It's going to be great. If you're interested, send me a note. Thank you all so much. Stay safe out there. Drink water. Stay hydrated. Get sleep. And yeah, then we will be leaving the meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Good night, Devin. Good night, East Coast.